Could you talk a little bit, if you're willing to, about how you make curriculum decisions?
Yeah.
Because Carol mentioned how hard, that she's not able to make recommendations. How do you figure out what to...
I was surprised to hear that. That stinks.
That stinks. Well, but we do give you some research information where you can go find that. Maybe.
Part of my homeschool group, like one of my best friends is homeschooled for a long time. So when I decided to homeschool, she kind of set me up in this homeschool group, and the moms kind of have conversations about like what curriculum do you use, what what are the pros and cons of each curriculum. Initially, when my oldest daughter left private school, I was using her curriculum that she was already in and just went with that. For this year, I decided on the unit study thing because I could teach all of them from the same topics and just kind of save time. So mostly recommendations from friends.
We'll open it up for questions if there are any. I think there's a microphone over here. So ask your questions.
Do you want us to walk over to the microphone? I'm probably loud enough.
Could you repeat it into the microphone? Why don't you just ask the question and Jackie will repeat it?
I guess my question is for Anne. Not the only, but one of the concerns I've had, I have kids of my own and I've thought about homeschooling, but one of the main concerns I have is whether or not the kids are going to get the interaction with other children of the same age. They come from different backgrounds and have different religions or different beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's something that obviously is missing if you're just teaching at
Right.
home. How do you deal with that, or do you not? Or
Let's just pause for a minute for a recording.
The question is for Anne regarding how do you make sure that your kids are socialized with other children of different backgrounds?
Sorry, I had an answer and then the question came again. So I'm naturally a very social person, so I think I kind of have a heads up there. Like, I can't stand to be cooped up in my house for more than a day with just my children. I start to feel very confined. We do live in an apartment complex right now, so all on the back, the playground is in our backyard basically. So they get to hang out with all the neighbor kids. I try to make that like their little haven where I don't have to be the boss of what they're doing. So they have to figure out how to get along with other people that don't have the same belief system as them. And that's been really helpful. But in buying a house, I'm kind of wondering about that because even our homeschool group is faith-based, so they have pretty much the same belief system. So, and our other forms of getting out are, church and gymnastics with our other homeschool friends. So mostly hanging out with neighbor kids. Did that answer enough?
yeah.
Okay.
So I have a question for Carol. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the way regulation plays out in Oregon with if you've seen cases where kids have had declining test scores and how the state gets involved and what that looks like.
Sure.
The question is for Carol regarding how do Oregon regulations step in when children's test scores are declining?
Basically, if we have so if a child tests and doesn't score above the 15th percentile, they have a year to sort of retest. And if that continues to be the case, that they're not scoring above the 15th percentile, we have the authority to basically order them back to school. And not necessarily public school, but school. And so that's really something that we have the authority to do. We rarely are in a position where we've needed to do that, so it's a fairly rare occurrence. And, periodically we will get, we do some checks and balances with the school districts. We notify them of, registration for homeschooling, and so sometimes they have kids who report back to school and the parents haven't notified us and vice versa. So we do some checks and balances around that, and that is part of that whole mandatory attendance checks and balances as well. But I have to say that if we order a child back to school and they don't go, it then becomes the onus of the school district to then file for truancy. So there's not anything we can, LANISD in and of ourselves can do other than say you're not in compliance and you need to be back in school. And so then it enters into that other realm, and it becomes the school district's responsibility to pursue that truancy process. And that's, I think generally that would happen, but we don't have a lot of experience because most kids do test above that 15th percentile. Now, does that mean that we get test scores and it doesn't maybe break our heart if someone is testing pretty low? Yeah, but we have no authority to do anything about that.
So this question is for Carol. So can you talk more about Can you talk more about the situation where a child is dual enrolled and what kind of agreement is needed between the school district? I know you mentioned that happens, and so how formal is that agreement? Where does that look like?
Most school districts have, oh, sorry, you're going to repeat that.
The question's for Carol regarding how do the school districts handle students who are dual enrolled?
Sure. Most districts have policy on that subject, and so it really is not so much a written agreement, but implementation of the policy. So let's pretend I'm a parent and I have a middle school student and I don't feel like I have the ability to teach a particular subject. Maybe it's a math, maybe it's some sort of math, algebra or something. And so I want my child to enroll in that class, or maybe I want them to enroll in something like drama, where there really needs to be a group of kids. And so I might arrange for my child to, now that's knock on wood, assuming middle school has a drama option right now, but I might arrange for them to enroll in a class like that, and they would be expected to attend on a regular basis like any other kiddo. That experience is not without some expectations, but if that's the arrangement that's made, almost every school in the county has an option for some sort of dual enrollment, because school districts want it to be successful as well, and they want to stay positively engaged with parents of homeschool students, even if they're not intending, because that student may eventually return, and there's no interest in a school in having an adversarial relationship. It's not a you've rejected us kind of piece. You're homeschooling, you've rejected us as a school system. It's really wanting to engage. You're still a taxpayer and supporting public schools. We want to be responsive to all of the taxpayers and parents, whether they have kids in our schools or not. So that dual enrollment is a win-win from a school district's perspective. But it's not a formal, document in any way, shape, or form. It's really policy.
What do we know, this is for anyone, what do we know empirically, if anything, about the success of homeschool children in terms of earning capacity after graduation or college matriculation? Has there been any work done in that area?
The question is whether after homeschooling there are any statistics showing how students progress and interact in the workplace.
Do you want to take that question, Carol?
I don't actually have any of that information. I believe there is some information out there. It probably is maintained by some of the homeschool associations, but we don't maintain any information like that.
When speaking to my husband, he really hadn't been in support of homeschooling our kids, just mostly for the social aspects, because we've all met those homeschooled kids that are just socially awkward. I hope my kids don't turn into that. I don't think they are yet. But anyway, part of that is he's he wants details and he wants numbers, So I looked into that, and from the homeschool, of course I was looking into homeschool advocating. So from their perspective, it's really high rates of homeschool kids that finish college, that go to college and finish college, as opposed to high school rates, public high school rates. I can't give you specific numbers, but they're out there.
And I would say that in terms of some of I think there is data out there, we don't maintain it, but I would also say that with regard to this notion of socialization, I have to say that I have 3 children of my own. They are not homeschooled, and they are all socially awkward. So I would claim on some occasions to be socially awkward. So I think that, I think that we find socially awkward in both arenas, and I think we find, I would say that there are children who spend lots of quality time with adults who have great social skills with other adults, and maybe that's the awkwardness, is because they have a level of sophistication that their peers don't have, that is awkward for them in some fashion. But that awkwardness probably is temporary, is my impression. And if they're awkward, it's likely that that awkwardness is not explicitly a homeschool product, and my kids, they'll probably murder me for saying that, but they would all probably, confess to being socially awkward, but, who isn't at some point? Sorry.
In a divorce situation with joint custody, if one parent is adamant about homeschooling and the other one isn't, how would that conflict be resolved?
The question is how are conflicts resolved between divorced parents regarding whether the child can be homeschooled or not?
So that's probably going to depend on what the custody arrangement is. So it will depend on the particular circumstance. I don't have a case to cite for you off the top of my head.
That is accurate, and I can tell you that we have had situations where functionally that very thing has happened, where there is a difference of opinion. We go by who has custody of the child, and in those situations we sometimes have to ask for proof of that custody, or when we get requests. We had actually a situation recently where we had disagreement about that, and there was some other backstory that was maybe more ominous, but we were getting into people wanting to, give us court orders and this kind of stuff, and so we sometimes are in a position where we're literally looking at something from a judge that gives us guidance about what the expectation, must report back to school, or is whatever the custody agreements are, and so sometimes we're having to look at those kinds of documents in the context of our registration process, or our request by one parent to do something different, or to give them something that we, if a parent homeschools and there's a divorce situation, that other parent has rights to all those documents. We cannot, absent a court order, restrict that information from the other parent, even though they're not the custodial parent. But we do have those circumstances where we're looking at those kinds of documents to give us guidance about what to do and whether we're going to register them or not. Not very often, but on occasion.
So what does graduation from homeschool, GED, high school diploma, what does it mean to graduate from homeschooling? Do you put one down?
The question is, what does it mean to graduate from homeschool?
That's a great question. We get parents who ask us that question. The parent determines when the child has graduated, so to speak, in terms of if they're ready for college. There is no requirement to obtain a GED. There's no requirement for specific testing, other than we have to have documentation of that 10th grade testing requirement. And if the parent says at that point in time, and maybe the testing supports it, maybe it doesn't, that they're finished, that the parent has the authority to do that as the teacher. There is the mandatory school attendance. The example I'm going to give you is we've had some students who have wanted to go on to college at age 17, and we've had some disputes on occasion with higher education institutions about whether they are done in K-12, so to speak, and they're doing homeschooling. And so sometimes we have to navigate, we have to look at the unique circumstances, but when the parent issues the certification, so to speak, that is the certification. They are the person controlling that process. There is no nothing that we give other than being able to state that they've maintained the mandatory, they've met the mandatory requirements up through that age and that grade, but the parents, that's their call.
Just to follow up then, is there an age to be able to sit for SAT or ACT? Or, you know, I mean, because most higher ed require an SAT or ACT.
Right. I don't know the age for ACTs or SATs. Normally they're taken during this.
Some of this, of course, will depend, though, on the college's
Correct.
admission requirements, too. And as I mentioned, there's that case from the Ninth Circuit saying that the school can decide what the,
Right.
what courses meet the curriculum, the prerequisite requirements for high school. Should we take one more question? I think we need to wrap up because I believe there's a class in here at 1:30, but maybe one more question and then we'll wrap up.
This question is for Carol. I'm not sure if this situation has ever come up, but I was wondering what the school district might do if a dual enrolled student was truant for that one class that he or she was in.
Boy, that is interesting. I think that they probably would simply I think ultimately that student is not on the rolls as being registered. They're registered as a homeschooler, so they're not technically truant. If they're not coming to class, they might contact the parents saying, this is kind of disruptive if your kid is not coming regularly, and, you know, are we not doing this anymore? But they wouldn't be truant in that situation because they're not technically enrolled in public school. They're enrolled, they're registered as a homeschooler.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap up so people can get to their next classes. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you to our speakers.